Hi, Mom. So I got my ticket home from Europe. I get back on June 6th, but it's a really late flight because that was the cheapest, so it gets in at midnight. But don't worry, I'll get a shuttle from the airport so you don't have to pick me up. Like, really seriously, you don't have to. Okay, so love you. See you soon. Bye.
Hi, I'm Steve Gaynor. I'm the co-founder of the Fulbright Company. We made Gone Home. I was the writer and designer, and thank you for taking a look at our commentary mode. Whenever you find an icon like the one you just clicked on, you can find out a little bit more about the game. I want to thank everybody who's added commentary. Yanman and Carla, my co-founders of the company, Kate Craig, our 3D artist, Chris Remo, our composer, Sarah Grayson, the voice of Sam Greenbrier, and Corin Tucker, the lead singer of Heavens to Betsy and Slater Kinney and other awesome bands. So thank you, everybody, and enjoy commentary mode. So, Christmas Duck. Christmas Duck is a fan favorite. He's kind of a mascot, I guess, and I think that's partly because it's a weird concept, a Christmas duck, and partly because it's like the first unique thing that you encounter in the game. It's kind of personified. He's like a little character. But the thing is, Christmas Duck was not planned. When we were starting the project, we didn't have a 3D modeler because Kate came on a couple months after we started, and we needed a bunch of 3D models. And so I was just going through the Unity asset store. So I was going through the list and saw this Christmas duck, and I was like, "What is that?" Okay, and I grabbed it, and we used it as like a test object just to set up the system where you can grab stuff and carry it around. And then I ended up saying, "All right, we got this Christmas duck, I'll hide the key under it." And instead of replacing the free model with a totally different thing, just made a real version of it, and Carla modeled it, and Kate textured it, and we kept him in the game, and we're glad, because he's everybody's little friend. Good old Christmas duck. Yeah, the biggest purpose of the card was, to say, oh, Sam is 17, if you look for this thing. But there's so much, we need so much handwriting in the game, especially for like one-off characters that you don't see their handwriting more than once. And we knew we needed a birthday card from some member of Sam's more extended family that you were never going to hear from again. And so I was like, okay, it could be her uncle. And as an Easter egg, kind of like wink and nod thing, like, we're fans of, the Looking Glass legacy of games and Deus Ex and Dishonored, and so I got in contact with Harvey Smith, who was the lead designer of Deus Ex and the co-creative lead of Dishonored, and asked if he would just write on a piece of paper, "Happy Birthday, Sam," from Uncle Harvey, and he just took a picture with his cell phone. And
like 5 minutes after you asked him. It was amazing. He was just like, "Yes, I will do this immediately."
Yeah.
It was the best.
I think, he took a picture with his cell phone, and it was really cool. Harvey's a great guy, and I love his games, and we're, super honored to have his signature in the hub of the Greenbrier house.
Hell yeah.
The Goodfellow High School jacket and the logo generally is a reference to the logo for Minerva's Den, the section of Rapture that DLC takes place in, that we worked on together. But we didn't want to make it look exactly like the owl logo from that game. We wanted it to be, an homage or a reference or whatever.
Yeah, so we decided that since this is a Pacific Northwest school and town and setting, that we would go for some native style representation. And let's see.
Well, actually, we were struggling with it for a little while because we wanted. At first, I was saying, just make it look like a very 90s looking school mascot logo illustration that's just cheap, that maybe one of the students did or something, and the direction wasn't good enough, and we didn't really have a good enough example to work from. And then Kate actually came to visit.
Oh yeah, that's right.
And she suggested, what if it's like a Pacific Northwest Native American style approach, and that really just clicked and made total sense.
Hello, my name is Kate Craig, and I was creating a lot of the environment assets for the game. Not all of them, some of them I had help with, which I'll touch on a little later, but most of the stuff like the walls and the floors, some of the larger pieces of furniture were my doing, and I'm going to be talking about some of the environmental storytelling aspects in Gone Home. I feel like I would be remiss if I didn't mention the work that my wife Emily Carroll did on the project. She did the house title image that we've used for our wallpapers and for the start screen of the game. She did the loading cassette tape, and she did the maps in the house. And actually, Carla made a font out of her handwriting because we wanted something that was just a little bit spooky, maybe a little ominous, but something that sort of suited the tone of the game. And I was really glad to be working with her, and I was really glad that the other guys were too. We had a really good time. And people have responded quite positively to her title screen, which is something that I really appreciate, and I know she does too.
Oh man, mom handwriting. We went through a lot of different moms for handwriting. A lot of different moms contributed handwriting for our game. At first, let's see, how did we do? What were we doing first? I think I just did it, and it wasn't great. And then we had Emily do it. But her handwriting was used so heavily in other parts of the game that we had to find someone else, and I think we actually had Yanman try to do it for a while before he was Dad's handwriting. And then we got Yanman's mom, and she was ideal for it. Really good mom handwriting. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Chris Remo, the composer on Gone Home. In my commentary tracks, I'm going to be talking a little bit about what went into creating the original music soundtrack for the game. Gone Home is an unusual game, musically speaking, in that it consists of two distinct music soundtracks. The one of those probably more frequently commented on is the collection of licensed Riot Grrrl songs that the player finds in Sam's cassette tapes strewn around the house. The other one is the original music that accompanies the player's undirected exploration of the house and underscores almost every one of Sam's audio diary recordings. When Steve first asked me to do music for Gone Home, I was really excited about it, but there are almost no parameters for what that meant in terms of format or scope. Having played an early build of the game, I started by just doing a few musical sketches with no real regard for length or usage, mainly consisting of vintage electric piano sounds like Wurlitzers and Fender Rhodes. I chose those instruments because I wanted sounds that would feel at home in the era of the game. The Twin Peaks soundtrack used a lot of Rhodes, for example, but would also blend into the background and not share much tone in common with the abrasive Riot Grrrl guitars. Some of the instrumentation and ideas changed from those first sketches, but they also contained one of the main themes that ended up accompanying Sam's arc throughout the final game.
This is where you find the first half of Sam's Locker, or I guess it's actually the second half of Sam's Locker combo as far as what the piece of paper is, but at first, there were the locker combination sheet was torn into three pieces. So you had one digit on each of them, and it was actually right before we sent out our IGF build to the judges. It was the night before, and Carla came down into the basement, and she was like, at 3 o'clock in the morning last night, I woke up in bed just being like, oh, we can't have it in 3 pieces, that's way too gamey. Well, that's bad, we have to fix that. And
I forgot about that.
And you were absolutely right. And you've had a couple of those being woken up by us making a bad decision kind of moments over the course of the development, and they were always important changes that needed to be made.
Hi, this is Corin Tucker from Heavens to Betsy. And Heavens to Betsy was a band that formed in 1991, actually. And I actually got the idea for joining a band when I moved to Olympia, Washington, and became a fan of the music scene there. And it seemed like everyone was in a band. So I decided I was going to start a band too, but I didn't actually start the band until I went home after the first year of college. I went back to Eugene, Oregon, and my high school friend Tracy Sawyer and I started playing music together, and that was the beginning of Heavens to Betsy. So I had told, with my big mouth, I had told all my friends that I was going to start a band, and the summer of, I think it was 1991, my friend Michelle Noel booked the International Pop Underground in Olympia, Washington. And she helped organize a night at the convention called Girl Night. And it was all women musicians. So she called me and said, hey, let's get you on stage with that, you want to play the show that I'm organizing. This totally new band that had never performed before. I mean, we had never performed ever any kind of music. Got invited to play this big show at the Capitol Theater in Olympia in front of all of our musical heroes, right? Everyone from K Records, all of Fugazi was there, all of Bikini Kill was there. This music that I was a huge fan of suddenly. That was our very first show, the very first Heavens to Betsy show. And we were terrified, but we did it, and people loved it, and it was, it changed my life forever that night.
So these are all the VHS tapes, or most of them, in the house, and these in the TV room are from they only belong to Dad and Sam, because Mom has some VHS tapes, but they're up in the bedroom. And you can tell Dad's because he writes in a big, heavy, all caps style handwriting, and Sam does not. So, contrary to popular opinion, the X-Files tapes are not Dad's, they're in fact Sam's.
But stuff like JFK
yes.
has an obvious dad interest, and some of the other stuff that we put in there was very much like, what is a dad movie?
Yeah.
What is when we were growing up, for instance, like, what is a movie that our dad or a neighbor's dad would have? So stuff like The Andromeda Strain or Moonraker, it's just sort of like, yeah, dads
love that shit.
Yeah, dads that were born in the 50s were super into that kind of stuff. And then some of it was, stuff that we liked or remembered from when we were growing up, like, you will know that Carla was involved in making this game because Beetlejuice and RoboCop are on a VHS tape. That's most of what you need to know about Carla.
That's true.
Right there.
My name is Sarah Grayson, and I do the voice of Sam Greenbrier in Gone Home. Currently based out of Portland, Oregon, so right around where the Fulbright Company is from, which is part of, I guess, how this all came to be. I started doing voiceover work probably about 4 or 5 years ago. It's been a bit of an on and off journey because I also have had regular 9-to-5 jobs that whole time. So I always get excited when I see video game auditions come across, because it's always been something that I wanted to do, and really excites me because I'm a video game fan myself. So there was an audition that came across that at the time was entitled Dear Diary, and it had this wonderful description about being this sort of 16, 17-year-old girl. Not too much detail about her, just that she was new to her school, new to this place she was living, and her sister had moved away. So she was sort of writing out her thoughts as if she was talking to her sister. So most of the time, I'll stand up at the mic when doing auditions. But for this one, I thought, well, no one's actually going to read their diary standing up. Like, this is kind of you write your diary while lying down in your bed, or like sitting cross-legged on the floor, or whatever. So I ended up having to pull the mic down, sat on my couch, legs crossed, got nice and cozied up in like my pajamas, and started reading it.
When you're putting like lamps and stuff around a house, one thing that you have to deal with is plugging them in. And something that always annoys me about level design in games is when there's some lamp or piece of electronics that would have to be plugged in because it doesn't run on batteries, but it doesn't have a cable because video games. And so, since a big part of the point of Gone Home is the specificity of the house and the believability of all the details,
because of that, Steve himself.
I spent some late nights with my meager Maya skills modeling custom cables for each of the things that's plugged in so that the cables actually run from the TV or the lamp or whatever to an outlet in the wall.
It is a really good detail. I think that I'm proud of you for getting that in there, Steve. That's important.
Yeah.
So here's one of Dad's pulpy JFK books. He's now moved on from primary sources to theories about how JFK was killed. However, this one purports to contain the truth. The publishing company is a doofy inside joke because, there's Harcourt Brace, the publisher that exists, and so I was trying to think of a good name for a publisher, and being a big nerd, I immediately thought of Harcourt Fenton Mudd, and how he basically sounds like a publishing company, so...
You have to say who that is.
No! Alright, fine. He's an awful character from
Star Trek.
Original Star Trek, which is called Mudd's Women, and also there's another one whose name an episode I can't remember for some reason.
I'm Mudd.
Fuck! Yes, okay. Thank you.
It's a Star Trek reference. You did it, Carla.
What?
One of our favorite movies is The Apartment, which was directed by Billy Wilder, and it starred Shirley MacLaine and Jack Lemmon, and it's from like 1960, and it's basically what Mad Men is, except actually from that time.
Yeah.
It's super good, and there's this weird, like, kind of humorous vocal tick that some of the executives in the movie have, where they will refer to something like, they'll say like, we're doing quite well dividends-wise, or something, and Shirley MacLaine's character is named, her last name is Kubelik, and one of the executives at different times says something like, so how are you getting along, Kubelik-wise? So anyway, super deeply buried Easter egg reference in joke. We made the law firm Kubelik and Wise that prepared Oscar's will just as a little wink and nod, a little Harcourt Fenton.
Quite Steve.
But yeah, The Apartment, you should watch it.
It's damn worth it. It's totally worth your time. It's a really good movie.
On Laserdisc.
Yeah.
The doors were actually one of the hardest things in the game to get working correctly, and I know that there's still some bugs existing with the doors, actually. But it's a surprisingly hard problem, which is why most video games just have doors that kind of slide away into nothingness or open in strange ways or don't, let you interact fully with doors. But of course, it's in a house like in Gone Home, a realistic house. It's important that everything be as natural as possible. The one concession we made to video gaminess is that the doors all swing both ways, which never happens in a real house. But it's necessary to prevent the player trapping themselves in some strange state.
Here we have Fresh Magazine, which is a synthesis and pastiche of Sassy Magazine, which if you haven't looked at it, or if it wasn't, something that you cared about in the early 90s, it was very feminist and strongly individualist and actually gave good advice. It was actually really good. Anyway, so yeah, this is the type treatment. The super grungy type treatment is totally indicative. That's how it used to be. Oh yeah, and amusingly, of course, our cover model is Rachel, Steve's wife. I had to make her put on this awful light pink lipstick and do the 90s-ist stuff imaginable. And she did it.
It was your idea to put a braid in the front of her bangs?
Yes.
Yeah, it seems like... Congratulations.
Oh, thanks.
Inside of this file folder, you find the first combination code in the game. This code goes to Dad's locked filing cabinet, and it's 0451, which is a bit of a tradition / in-joke amongst... I mean, it's not really an in-joke, it's just an internal reference amongst this lineage of games that hark back to immersive sims that are kind of first-person exploration games that started with Ultima Underworld and System Shock, and 451 was the first key code in System Shock, and then it was also the first key code in System Shock 2 and Deus Ex and Bioshock and most recently Dishonored. And yeah, I've personally worked on a couple of games that had 0451 as the first code in them, and we were really adherent to the tenets of the interactive model and kind of the principles of design behind those games when we were designing how Gone Home works, and so to maintain that tradition, we also made it the first code in our game.
And you made it the tattoo on your arm.
I also got a tattoo of 0451 because it is sort of a symbol of this certain philosophy of game design that's important to me. And yeah, this writing, breaking canon, is in Emily's handwriting. Emily's handwriting is technically only in the font that exists outside the game. She doesn't actually do the handwriting in any of the characters, but yeah, I had her write 0451 in her very distinctive handwriting, and then I got a tattoo of it and figured I would use that source image as the image that you find on the inside of this folder here.
Most of the bookshelves in the house are filled with undifferentiated books. I mean, they're not undifferentiated, but they're low detail because, God, it would be an entire dev cycle's worth of work to actually do plausible spines on every single book. That would kill us. And then to repeat a whole bunch of books would also be sort of terrible and not be very plausible. So we had chiefly unlabeled books or books in which the labels have been rubbed off due to age, etc. And we had a few individual books that were more precisely and specifically named.
The way that we did the books in the game is we made like 3 or 4 of these clumps of books that have, the generic spines on them. They're just sort of filler books. They're kind of like what would be in the bookshelves of like a lawyer's office in a in a cheap lawyer's TV commercial or
Right,
something.
where they buy them by the foot and whatever.
Yeah, and then we took 1 or 2 clumps and retextured them to all have specific readable spines on them, and then I just took those clumps and broke them up and scattered the individual books around in different bookshelves in the house, so that hopefully I think every bookshelf has at least one unique book in it. That might not be true of everything in the library since there's so many bookshelves there, but I guess I should say every or almost every bookcase had at least one unique book in it that never repeated, to kind of split the difference of, okay, they're not all generic, but also we can't afford to make them all unique, and we didn't want to have any repeat in an obvious way. So that was our strategy for trying to not do any of the things that we wanted to not do. Sam's story slash school assignment called The Menstrual Cycle, a novella, is kind of a fan favorite. We've found like a lot of people have enjoyed it a lot, and it's one of those weird things where it wasn't planned. Like, it was, let's see, I had decided that I wanted Sam to have done like some homework, and I thought sex ed homework would be interesting because sex ed is a weird class in high school to be in, and so I Google searched for an actual sex ed assignment, and the assignment is a real sex ed assignment that is given out in like the Pacific Northwest, like Seattle. I think this is technically from the Seattle School District website that I got this from. So I found this thing which I didn't come up with, that I was kind of presented with, and I think I had been reading some stuff about like cool female spies in World War II, or like saboteurs, that had been part of like the French Resistance and stuff like that, and so that's why the history book is next to the sex ed assignment. The intended implication being Sam was doing history homework and sex ed homework, and the history unit was on World War II, and so kind of as a fuck you to all of the annoying assumptions implied by the sex ed assignment, she wrote this story about a woman in the war who was more interesting than her menstrual cycle, like that is a person, but while fulfilling the requirements of the thing. And yeah, it ended up being this really kind of strange juxtaposition of concepts that ended up saying a lot about Sam, I think.
This is our old-timey record that we got from archive.org, source of all good things. It's by Adrian Rollini when he was with, apparently, the Taproom Gang. The song is entitled Got a Need for You, in case you can't read it, but you should be able to read it. And the duck I found on the internet. Adrian Rollini I got into him when I was on Bioshock 2 and helping source the soundtrack for that. And I did a lot of listening to 40s big band stuff, and Adrian Rollini was one of the ones that I really liked, and so it was cool to be able to revisit that.
I feel like one of the best bits of advice was actually from the Fulbright team before going in to do the first recording. And it was a suggestion that I should watch some episodes of My So-Called Life, which was great because I'd watched them all when they were actually on. It was one of those favorite shows my sister and I would sit down and watch every week. And so going back and watching them was definitely not a hard chore to have to do. So I basically went through all of the episodes I could find online in a couple of days. So it was a bit of a sudden binge watch of My So-Called Life, but it was great because I think watching My So-Called Life was a nice reminder of what a more natural presentation of a teenager is. So it was really, I don't know that it would have gone as well had I not done that.
Composing the ambient exploration tracks definitely ended up being the weirdest part of creating music for Gone Home. The audio diaries tended to take precedence since they had such clear criteria for completion, so the ambient tracks were the last things I did. I spent so long immersed in the logs, which were very specifically timed, that to suddenly shift gears to creating these slow, standalone 5-minute pieces was surprisingly difficult. I remember giving Steve a first stab at the ambient track for part 2 of the game, and I didn't hear anything back about it. When I eventually asked if he had any feedback, he said something like, "Oh yeah, it's great, I just slowed it down by 50% and it totally works," which cracked me up, because I definitely didn't have that in mind. But that's one of the great things about collaborative work, so I just went with it. I ended up doing a number of further revisions where I'd alter elements of the original version specifically to affect how the 50% slowed version would sound. It was definitely a new experience for me, writing bits of music and trying to imagine how they would sound after it's been considerably distorted. It got weirder though. The ambient track for part 1 ended up being a backwards version of the slowed down part 2 track. And again, there were elements that sounded good at 50% slow forwards, but not at 50% slow backwards. So again, I went back to the original track and started altering elements so they would sound better at half speed in reverse. I don't know if that's a thing ambient composers end up getting used to, but for me it definitely felt like going down the rabbit hole.
One of the larger assets that we needed for the basement to really give it character and personality was a furnace. And when we were initially thinking of the furnace, Steve had mentioned to me the furnace from Home Alone, which if you grew up in the 90s like I did, you know exactly what I'm talking about. So I did a lot of research and looked up stuff that could kind of evoke a similar feeling, and we finally settled upon octopus furnaces, which are like, they're thematically and time-wise very appropriate. They're these giant hulking monstrosities with all these arms covered in asbestos. Really perfect, so we ended up modeling one of those and put it in the corner, and I think it turned out okay.
Oh man, this thing.
So 2 things. 1, Mom's Canadian.
Yay!
2, Mom didn't start out Canadian. The reason that Mom is Canadian is because Kate Craig and Emily Carroll are Canadian, and early on in the development of the game, Emily did Mom's handwriting.
This is before she did any of the UI text or anything.
Right, and it was before we decided that all the moms were going to actually be written by moms and all that kind of stuff.
Integrity in moms.
And so we had the answering machine note in the foyer, and there the line, what's the actual line that's there? It's like
neighborhood.
Right, yeah. So the line on the thing is like, Daniel from the old neighborhood called, call him back. And we gave the text to Emily, and she wrote it out longhand and gave it back to us. And then I looked at it, and I realized that she had inserted a U into the word neighborhood.
Because it's what you do.
Because of being Canadian. And so, to fix that bug, instead of removing the U, I said, bug fixed, Mom is now Canadian. So there's this little scrap of paper that's hidden under this bedside table, and you start to read it, and then Katie makes you stop reading it. And it was this thing where it's an exception to the interactive expectations that you have. Like, it's one place, I guess the one place where we really impinge on your ability as a player to do what you want. And Katie intervenes, basically, and it was something that I thought was an interesting little one-off way of emphasizing the difference between the player and the character that they're playing as. And to you as a player, the note's just a note, but a reminder that, like, Sam is Katie's sister, and Katie wouldn't want to read this thing, and she's not going to keep doing it, even if you want her to.
You know, there was kind of this intellectual, cross-cultural, like pen pal thing that happened before the internet. You know, we used to write letters back and forth to each other about our ideas and about how we wanted to change things. And so a bunch of these women that I mentioned came up with this idea of Riot Girl, of being a punk rocker that was also an in-your-face feminist.
There was a little bit of concern on my part before any of this got started that you never know how much liberty you're going to be given and how much over direction you're going to get, because somebody hears it like a specific way, and if you deviate from that at all, you're just going to keep doing the line over and over and over again, like 50 times until it's right. So I really wasn't sure what to expect, but even on the first day getting in there and being able to go through a few of the lines and just give them what came to mind, and seeing how closely I think everyone was on the page about it. So the direction was always really positive, and it was always kind of coming from either additional information that changed the context of what I was reading, or a certain change in the phrasing or the way something is being, you know, a pause here or maybe move it to here, or instead of emphasizing this word, try this one instead. So you end up with a lot of different takes that really give it a very different feeling, depending on which one you go for.
Putback is the feature that I'm happiest with in the game. It actually came about as sort of a little bit of an accident. Playtesters had told us they didn't want to feel like some kind of horrible person rummaging around this house and tossing everything on the floor. But there wasn't really any other option initially. That's all you could do was sort of try and lob things back into the place. So, you know, I had done some code before for placing turrets and things in other games where it, you know, will arbitrarily orient an object to be perpendicular to surface and all that sort of stuff. I told Steve that, you know, we'd have a lot of edge cases with that and it would take some time to implement, and temporarily I would just give him the ability to put objects that these things would kind of stick to in the game, and we tried that, and it worked so well that we decided to keep that, and that's where Putback came from.
The music for Gone Home was mainly composed over two separate periods, roughly a year apart. A version of Part 1 of the game had to be ready by October 2012 for submission to the 2013 Independent Games Festival, so I did all the Part 1 audio logs primarily that September. The following summer I did another round of logs for the second half of the game, as well as some Part 1 revisions in the ambient exploration tracks. One really nice side effect of the long gap between composition sessions, as well as the structure of writing music that is very literally accompanying a story, was that I ended up hitting on pretty different ideas and approaches over time as I got further along in Sam's story. The original sketches I did had mainly electric piano sounds, which are warmer and more naturalistic than synthesizers and other electronics instruments. As Sam and Lonnie's story developed more, though, I started to bring in acoustic guitar as well. It seemed like an appropriate way for the music to build up some more familiar, natural elements, somewhat echoing Sam coming into her own. Eventually, it became a really tonal element of the score. After that emerged, I started to more carefully control the instrumentation for the various main categories of log subject matter, including Sam's self-reflections, Sam and Lonnie, Sam and her parents, and even Sam and Daniel. Some of those have their own melodies and themes as well. That wasn't really a grand plan from the start, and I don't expect everyone to really notice it, but it became one of my favorite things about working on this score.
Fanzines, I mean, that's one of the things that we started doing right away, was doing these Riot Girl fanzines, and everyone would contribute and write, you know, an article for it, and then we'd compile it and make these Riot Girl fanzines, and we would mail them out to people. I mean, you know, all this is so funny to talk about it before the internet, but you know, we used the mail, and people would write. You know, we had a P.O. box, and we started getting letters because people would read in someone else's fanzine there's this Riot Girl thing that started happening, right? And it just, I mean, it was the most incredible thing. It just snowballed. Girls wanted to be a part of it immediately across the country, right? So for the time we started Heavens to Betsy in 1991, I think it was only a year later, right? So 1 year of Riot Girl meetings and these letters happening and these fanzines happening. Well, a year later, we left on the Riot Girl tour, the Heavens to Betsy Bratmobile Riot Girl tour, from Olympia to DC. Well, for some reason, it took us like almost 5 weeks to get there on this tour. And we ended up staying in DC another something like 5 weeks before the Riot Girl convention that happened. So all of this, all of these fanzines, all these girls across the country started getting interested in Riot Girl, and the press just went bananas. I mean, the press attention was off the hook. New York Times, USA Today, all these journalists wanted information and wanted to interview all of us. And it was crazy. So by the time we got to the Riot Girl convention, suddenly we were truly part of a movement.
So earlier in an earlier version of the story in Gone Home, Sam and Lonnie got caught together, and Lonnie's dad was like an asshole about it and threatened to send Lonnie to live with her mom in Florida. And we cut that. It was too melodramatic and it wasn't really interesting. It was an external force that was acting on them, which I wasn't super excited about in practice, and so on and so forth. But it caused there to be this concept of Lonnie's mom living in Florida, which
Florida is, of course, the worst place that you can live.
Well, let's not assume. But that said, it's the other side of the country, and it's totally so foreign from Oregon and everything. Also, it's where I grew up.
Yeah, that was. Well,
So
I was kidding you.
so yes, the reason I think that Lonnie's mom lives in Florida is that I grew up in Florida, and I moved from Florida to Oregon when I was like 19, and I've been back to visit, but if someone were to say to me, "Hey Steve, do you want to go back and live in Florida?" I would take a sheet of notebook paper and I would write "no" on it, as big as you can get, and
with
hand it back to
gravestones.
you. There would be knives, there would be
Yeah.
gravestones, there would be
Dead
lightning,
face. Yeah.
big X's in the
Yeah.
eyes, vampire teeth for some reason.
I was largely unfamiliar with Florida, and my family started going there every once in a while, or when I was like in high school for Christmas, because my mom hates being cold. And
Pick the wrong goddamn place to live,
I
Mrs.
know.
Zamanja.
Yeah, well, but anyway, the only thing that I remember basically is that everybody had lawn flamingos, and we went around Christmas, so I remember hearing on the radio multiple times dogs barking Christmas carols. That's Florida.
Florida sounds cooler than I remember it being.
In my head, that's Florida, right there.
All of the sliding doors that you see in the game are actually, from a code perspective, drawers. When I made a thing that could slide along a track like that, for the purpose of making drawers, Steve took it and, as designers are wont to do, used it for his own purposes and came up with sliding doors in our game.
Writing Sam was a unique challenge, just in the sense of, on the one hand, it was very much from my personal experience because it's about being a teenager and my memories from that time, as an individual, but also who Sam was and what her experience was. Came about as a result of kind of problem solving that we were doing, that Carla and I were doing, just figuring out what the story and what the conflict in the story was going to be. So, by the time we figured out this was all going to take place in one house, and the conflict was going to be between the members of this family, and it had to be kind of irreconcilable differences that would cause serious drama between the members of this family, we started thinking, what form could that take? Could it be that the teenager of the family falls in love with somebody that they're not supposed to and the parents don't agree? And what is the contemporary version of that? And so, we at some point decided that we were going to write Sam as a gay character who had fallen in love with another girl, and what conflict would that cause within the family, right?
And we were excited about that opportunity just because of the paucity of that kind of narrative in games. And I remember when we came up with that concept, just being like, oh man, this is gonna be good. We actually get to do this, which is really cool. But anyway, we actually we had to do a lot of work to make it plausible.
Right. Well, because the other side of it is that I'm the writer on the game, and on the one hand, a lot of teenage experience is universal. But I also, at some point, just had that very clear realization of, okay, I have just signed up for writing a gay teenage girl. Two out of the three aspects of that character are not something that I've actually lived through. And so it was impressed upon me, especially like when I was working at Irrational, how important research was to getting your fiction right, whether it's very practical terms like how something works mechanically, to what the characterization of the individuals in your story might be. And so my process was reading a lot of blogs about people's actual experiences growing up, being gay and being female, and reading fiction and nonfiction about people's experience, and doing original interviews with people that I knew in my life, and asking them about what they remember about growing up with these experiences, and being able to actually, ask follow-up questions. And I'm really grateful to all the people who have shared their experiences through writing, and who were willing to share their experiences with me, personally, talking to me into a microphone so that I could refer to it later, which is just a huge leap for someone to take, to talk about their own, coming of age and all of those very personal experiences. But, I couldn't have gone into writing this character with just saying, well, I'll just assume that I'll do an okay job and write it however it seems like I should. And instead saying, you have to take this seriously, and you have to actually reach out to people who have lived it, so that when you're writing this character, it represents the experience of people like her in a way that is plausible and respectful and
authentic.
Yeah, that represents them in a way that doesn't cheapen the experience that they've had by relying on cliches or just kind of your expectations as an outsider.
It's really about the ideals that we were trying to get across in our music. I think that the move to equality for women and for everyone in the U.S. is something that we all want to be a part of, right? And we used Riot Grrrl, and we used music as the tool for that, And but it's really, to me, it's about equality for everyone. That I think is the key, and that's why young people really feel passionate, and they listen to the music and they hear that passion, and that's what they connect with.